Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. As I sit on the bus and watch the astonishing events in the world unfold on the iPhone I'm holding in my own hands, I wonder what else will new media mean to me and our future. My guest, Ricki Goldman, is a leading theorist. She's an educator, inventor, designer, video ethnographer, and a professor in the Steinhardt School of NYU. And maybe she's going to help me figure out what's going to be next. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
I'm delighted to be here.
So tell us what it is you do.
Well,
a lot of things.
Since there is a long list of things that I do, the core of my work is in education, trying to make sense of how, with new media, people learn differently, and how we can prevent problems in that way of learning, and how we can promote better learning.
Let's start. What do we define? What is new media?
Oh, that is such a question. Okay. Well, new media is a term that really emerged from the term multimedia, and but it basically means emerging media. It means that every single time new media enters into the workplace and into education and into society, that means it continues. So it has to do with anytime, anywhere, online, digital, and the terms keep changing. So some people don't use multimedia anymore, for example.
I see. So did new media really start with the internet?
Oh, yes.
Well,
yes and no.
Because
let's go back to when there was all of this file sharing that was happening at DARPA, the defense organization that supported so much of the introduction of new media for protection, military stuff. Yes.
So much of what we find in the world comes from that, isn't it?
Well, that's where there was money, especially in the 50s and 60s. Yeah. So what really ended up happening was that you had then people who were interested in taking that media and using it for creative endeavors.
So it started behind the scenes.
Yes.
Now that it's in so many people's hands, it has enormous consequences.
Yes, enormous.
So learning, let's talk about that.
Okay.
When you say that it helps learning,
right?
What does that mean? Is it a technique for teaching in schools?
Well, let me first of all clarify that I see the dangers of new media. I'm not one of those. I think I can say I'm no longer one of those utopian persons who is looking just at the positive. On the other hand, I'm not dystopic either. I'm trying to understand how we can balance all the benefits and the affordances of new technologies, but also protect children and ourselves as learners, as lifelong learners, from some of the problematics. And I think we know what those problematics are.
What do you mean by that? Is it finding out too much information, pornography and things like that you don't want children? That's not what you mean.
No, not really.
No.
It's not being able to handle to all that information that's coming at us all the time. And so how we want engagement, we want students to feel engaged in playing video games, doing whatever we can do to enhance what's happening. On the other hand, we want to guarantee that with all the information that's coming in, there's depth. There is depth of knowledge. You know, what happens is that the media, it's not actually the media. And
my husband always refers to the media as mediocre. Media is this short for mediocre. Anyway, go on. He's talking to print, but anyway.
Yes, I like to play with words like that. For example, evidence-based research, which really means making things evident.
Yeah.
Accountability, which really means accounting for something. Not accountability in the way in which we're dealing with teachers right now, actually, in New York City and around the world.
I read about your work in Vancouver and Boston.
Right. Thank you.
And what I gathered from that in my very lay position is that we have our own thoughts, and they come from our own histories. And so our perceptions are inside, right?
Right.
But when we see what other people's perceptions are, because they come from different histories, then we get a more rounded result. Is that wrong?
you touched the exact core of my work. In fact, I didn't even know if we would be talking about that today. So I'm delighted. So thank you. I'm actually only now beginning to look at the perceptual system and perceptions. What I focused on, because I came into this as a person who was studying making, and I was interested in point of view as how one would frame things as we're being framed now. How close up, whose perspective was that?
I see, it's the giving out.
It's the way in which we interpret the world. But obviously, you're right. First of all, we have this wonderful, incredible body that can't be replicated by a machine, as good as Watson might be right now. But we have this body that is continually bringing in sensory stimulation, but it's being layered on already predispositions and innateness, differences in the genetic structure and the genetic code, etc. So I see this as a layering upon already existing ways of understanding the world. And then with that, and then I'm curious about how our different perspectives, our perspectivity then shapes what we see. So we're all on Twitter, for example, let's say. And we're all tweeting something, and everybody's tweeting, and sort of it moves like this, right? And everybody's tweeting something different. And we're sort of left with this very, broad, wide, sort of accumulation of people's perspectives, their point of view, their biases, for that matter. What I'm trying to say is that this is good. But what we now need is the next generation of technologies, which are going to filter and bring sense-making and bring the depth that's missing. So, for example, wouldn't it be great if all of the new emerging leaders in Egypt right now, or any of the other countries that are undergoing this revolution, wouldn't it be great if there was some way for them to gather and to make sense of what all these people were saying? So that's a layering to build and I'm using Clifford Geertz's notion of the thick description. So to thicken this, to broaden this, to look for the depth, to look for the real meanings of things. It's a sort of semiotic view I'm talking about, of being able to take something and make sense of it, and then to also see its connection to not just one field, but to multiple fields.
Do you think we can connect it politically now, or in the larger community, with people having seen what happened in Egypt, and it's happening in that region, and the reaction and the sit-in in Wisconsin?
I absolutely see the connection, yes. And I think there was, it has made people feel that their voices are important, that their perspectives, that their point of view is important, and that what we need to do now, again, like I just said, is to find some way of filtering through and building some theories that emerge from this, some approaches. And people have a weird way of thinking about theory, and I'm a theoretician. And the word really means a seeing. It is an observing, a seeing. That's what theoria means, a seeing. So we have to bring back how we see, how we know the world, and use that. And then not to say that we're left there, but in fact, that's the beginning point, to be acknowledged for our seeing. It's a beginning point for our understanding how other people see the world. And I don't just mean how other people individually see the world, but books and music and all the world's knowledge is about the expression of different people's understanding of the world. So we have to bring people back into disciplinary knowledge, but at the same time seeing all the connections, a greater openness among the different knowledges.
So it's going to, it's a globalization of ideas. It's not an economic globalization, but isn't it? It's going to bring, is it going to be, is that what we could compare it to or not?
An economic one?
Well, I'm forgetting the economic they talk about economic globalization, the large corporations and all of the extension all over the world. Right. But this is just connecting every country. I mean, there's no part of the world that's going to be a mystery to anybody.
Right. On the other hand, we have a lot of work to do in terms of translating different cultures, different cultural mores,
Right.
the languages,
So
the subtleties. We know so little. We're really at the surface of any kind of real global learning of each other.
So what's an ethnographer?
What's an ethnographer? A person who likes to observe, make sense of, interpret the small things like people sitting on a bus or on a train with their iPads and wondering why they're not looking at each other. So we're interested in the details, the small details that have something to do with cultural change, with growths of cultures. The word, we can look back to early Margaret Mead's work.
So I was going to say,
Yeah.
is it not a part of anthropology? Are you an anthropologist?
I'm not an anthropologist by training, but I am an
Anthropologist by practice.
Yes, by practice. I think I've always been an anthropologist. I think there is a part of me that was always curious whether it was, I mean, I was always watching and observing and making sense of and writing poems or observations, or that was the core of how I understood the world. But I would say it changes with digital video, and especially with digital video ethnography.
Now, digital video is no film. What's
Okay.
digital
Well,
video?
it's not what we're having right now.
Right.
However, it could become that. Well, because right now, immediately after this program, there's going to be a digital, everything's going to be edited digitally, although it is a linear production. But we tend to think of digital video ethnography as the ability to look at segments of things and segments of video and put them together and do some deeper analysis of that. So it enables us to repeat things. It enables us to begin to look at, let's say, a twitch, as Clifford Geertz would have talked about, and to understand if somebody first, does this with their brow or smiles in a certain way. We could actually go in there and try to understand. With digital technologies, we can make better understandings and conclusions about what that person meant given the context of that situation. And then larger, how does that give us some cultural information?
So do you study the United Nations?
No, but I have a theory that I often thought would be very, very helpful for the United Nations.
Yes.
And it is about this perspectivity theory. And I think that's why I developed it, to tell you the truth. I was very surprised that we run into so many situations in the world where people have to fight and kill each other instead of sitting down and trying to find, not an agreement. I think the problem with a lot of the negotiations that happen are that they're about agreements. We might not be able to reach agreements. What we might be able to do is share some patterns of things we can look at and we can act on without actually, knowing, saying whether Ireland should be, whether it's the Protestants or the Catholics and who should run whatever. But we need, first of all, to set the infrastructure for that. And I think ethnography is a very good way of doing that, because it forces you to step outside of the problem and to look more deeply.
Does that mean understanding why the person you are talking to, or not negotiate? Well, are you negotiating? Not really. You're trying, in a way. Well, you're trying to understand why the other party does what it does. Right. Is that right?
Right. And you're trying to see some
and then have
larger,
them understand why you do.
I'll give you a perfect example. Rodney King.
Yeah.
Right.
That was the beating of the LA police, right?
Exactly, right. Of the African American who was beaten up by the police in South LA.
A couple of
a
while ago.
I should know the exact date.
Sorry.
Okay, so but the question that seemed to me there was not the whodunit story. That was going to take us nowhere. And unfortunately, that's what all the media then focused on. Who did it?
Right.
And who was to blame? Instead, Why didn't we find out more about the Korean grocery person? Why didn't we find out more about the culture of being a policeman in South LA? What was going on with Rodney King and among his associates, among, what were the pressures he was under? I think if we could have solved a lot of problems by looking at different kinds of questions.
But you would be the death then of television and newspaper news.
Oh, I think not.
No?
We are a society of stories.
Right.
We are especially North America.
Right.
I say North America because I'm Canadian.
Yeah.
So we love stories, and stories are at the bases of any kind of ethnography. So in fact, telling really important stories about people's lives, I think begins to open up the discourse a little differently. We don't look for the black and white anymore, and we can't anymore. I think that is one thing we have now learned through digital media, and especially media like Twitter. We can no longer look back and just see black and white. What we're seeing is a range.
It's interesting. What comes to my mind now would be a criminal trial of somebody who molested a child or something, and then they come back and they go into the past of that person, and that person was molested or that person was this. I mean, to come up with a background. Is that what you're talking about a little bit?
Well, yes, but I'm talking about bringing more stakeholders.
Right. Yes.
Right now,
that's just, yeah.
More stakeholders to the table who have a voice in shaping their own communities. That's what I'm talking about.
Well, that's certainly what's happening in the world.
What's happening, but we still aren't there. We're just having all this mass of stuff being tweeted, but we're not having the filtering, the patterns. We're not searching for the patterns in the data, I
have to admit that after thinking about this program yesterday, I decided I'd better find out what tweet is. So I Googled tweet, and then it has its own website, so I decided to click on that, and so then I registered, and then it comes back that I've already registered, so I haven't got the faintest idea what it is. Tweet is done on your phone?
Any electronic, and your
anything.
computer, your
Anything.
iPad.
I see. And it's got its own vocabulary. Why is it just, it's just the letters?
You have 140 characters
I
that
see.
you can say something in. In fact, I have a joke.
Oh, I see. It means that's all, that's as long as the message can
Yes.
be. Okay. Now I got it.
Yes, that's as long as the message can be.
So it's not a great mystery.
It is. If you start
to just
seeing
start
what
it,
people have
as
built,
saying.
worlds of what people have built and are willing to share with each other. I remember sitting with a dear friend of mine, an archaeologist, very famous archaeologist in Israel, Avram Biran, and he had just been to his dig, and he found something that was very important, and he was a very, dear friend. And so we're sitting around the dinner table, and I ask him about it, and he won't tell me. And he said, well, you'll have to read it in the article that comes out. Well, we are so far away. And he was in his 80s, late 80s at the time.
It's very hard to adjust.
But for him, that was what scholarship and academia was about. And that's what school was about, ownership of ideas. And this idea that we're now sharing these ideas with each other.
So interesting. So it's going to be a very large shift in power.
Very large shift. Unless, as I say, I always temper these things. On the other side, it means there can be an awful lot of power from people
who shouldn't have it.
Who shouldn't have the power. So we're going to have to build new safeguards to protect schools, children who are exposed to this, and we're going to have to protect society in some way. And
that's a debate, isn't it, within the field?
It is a debate, yes. Yeah. I think someone like Brian Lair has been doing a really remarkable job at trying to create these open spaces for people to do this kind of thinking. This is what we need. We need it on the ground because that will shift parents, teachers, administrators. I see my job now so flat. It was true. It was absolutely true. This is a flat world, and as
Why
much
do you
as I
say that you see
resisted.
it so flat? What does that mean?
Because my students, I'm running a course at the university, right? And it's digital video ethnography. And we have a Facebook as well. We have, of course, other online tools which I control. But I set up a Facebook group, and now the students are finding readings and movies that we should be watching for this course. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying, oh my God, you know, like, they're right. I wouldn't have come across, you know, this movie called Exit from the gift store. I would not have found that movie.
Right.
And they did. And it was so pertinent to things like who has the right to create a story? What is a story? Is it a hoax? How do you understand authenticity of what you see? Like, you know, all of these kinds of issues which in ethnography and which in learning, if you want an educated society, you're going to have to find ways to guide them through this. So the role of teachers is just as important. It's just that it's changing. The role of a professor is changing. The role of a president of the United States is changing. The role and dictators no longer are getting the support that they thought they once had. It is really becoming, as Friedman said, a flat world, which I never liked the expression, but I have to admit, yes, I'm convinced
The
now.
movie Rashomon that we all saw many years ago, that's basically,
Yes.
It was
Yes, that was a very big inspiration for me, as was Jean Rouche's movies in Africa, when he actually gave the cameras to people to make their own representations. And that is exactly how my research has been. I guess that's one of the things people know my work for, is that I gave children the cameras, and then they showed me what their culture was about, the culture of the classroom, the culture of doing a project of an endangered
We mentioned the
rainforest.
project. Part of it was in an all-white middle-class area in Vancouver.
It was
Sort of.
there were indigenous First Nations people, and that was the one it wasn't in Vancouver, but it was in British Columbia. And that was my second
my
longitudinal.
perception of Vancouver, British Columbia is Vancouver.
Right.
I have to enlarge.
Exactly. I'll tweet you about it.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
So, so the first one that I did, the first ethnography, was with Seymour Papert, a very well-known educator and mathematician who created the language logo. And we were about 10 researchers in a school in Jamaica Plain in Boston, where we were working with a very mixed population of children with very low opportunities, let's say, opportunities for higher education. And within time you had, young girls, holding their computer with their arms and saying, I have to show you what I did. This is my girl that I created on the computer, and this is the game that she does. So there was this real appropriation, and it was remarkable to see the changes that happened. And the recent study I'm doing right now is with my doctoral students, is at the Urban Assembly in Brooklyn. And this is an after-school program, and you probably know a bit about this school. It is a very interesting, and it's an after-school program. And they're in the phase of using a game design program called GameStar Mechanic, and we're doing the videography of them using it. And now now that they've learned about how to design a game, they're actually going to be creating their own games.
Okay.
And next year, I think, is going to be even more exciting in the research. We're going to change the ways that there'll be more physical objects that they can use, because there's something that we've lost in working with computers that means that we are in front of a screen, even a touch screen. Even with a Wii, we've lost some of our body in this. So we're going to try to engage students. We are not going to try to, we're going to engage students in making things with their hands, in thinking about those objects that they're making as something connected to their own representation of how they think. And then that's how we're going to begin to sort of look at building the future. And we're also examining teacher gestures at a school in the Upper East Side. So it's
You also, and we're running out of time, what do you call it?
gender flexing.
Gender flexing.
Right.
Which is, very briefly.
Okay. It means that gender, we can't just look at how boys learn, how girls learn. Because we all try on different ways of learning appropriate to the given situation that we're in. It's a range, just like gender. Oops, ooh, I think it's a range. Right. So gender is a range. Lots of things that we see in the binary world of opposites, right? Black and white, right. Simplicity versus complexity. Right. There aren't these strong extremes. So in education, in learning, I think in designing technologies for the future, we have to imagine that there's a spectrum, a full spectrum filled with many colors and many different ways that children learn, that adults learn, to engage them in healthful ways for their own future.
I think now we could start a whole nother program. In politics, I've always thought there was until really recently, when we've had so many women that I don't agree with, that there was a woman's perspective to public policy.
Right.
But are you saying that that may not be true?
Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Ricki Goldman. And I'm going to tweet all the time.
Okay, I'll see you on tweet.
All right,
on Twitter.
Twitter.
We'll be there together.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me.
You're very welcome. It was
my pleasure.
Is there any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore? Please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.